Alara checked the clock on her dashboard, 1:14 a.m. She was 4 hours into her drive from the city back to her quiet coastal town. The state highway was less a road and more a seam stitching together vast, black stretches of Oregon logging country. The air conditioning hummed, fighting the lingering humidity of a late summer night. She was running on 2 cups of cold coffee and the adrenaline of having just signed a major contract. But now, the adrenaline was fading, replaced by a heavy, sticky exhaustion. The only light came from her own high beams, carving a tunnel through the absolute darkness of the surrounding woods. It was a flash of white, unexpected and entirely out of place, that ripped her from her trance-like focus on the dashed white line. Alara slowed, gripping the steering wheel. There, positioned perfectly in the center of her lane, was a child's bright red bicycle. It was pristine, almost glowing under her lights, lying on its side. It looked like it had been dropped mid-ride. No parent would leave a bike here. No child would be out here. This felt wrong. Every true crime podcast she'd ever listened to screamed the same warning. Never stop for an anomaly on an isolated road. Alara flicked her turn signal and carefully steered into the oncoming lane. She kept her foot hovering over the brake, scrutinizing the ditches on both sides. She saw nothing but dense fir trees and ferns. No tire tracks. No car pulled over, no house, and certainly no terrified child searching for their missing bike. As she passed the object, she glanced quickly. The bike looked unnervingly new. It was a perfect, non-threatening lure. She sped up, heart starting to thrum. But she made a note of the exact mile marker. Me 47.5R. She was maybe 5 miles past the bike when she saw it. A faint, sporadic glint in her rearview mirror. It wasn't the steady, high brightness of a following car. It was low, closer to the ground, and appeared only when the road curved just right, reflecting her own taillights. It was inconsistent, like something deliberately avoiding being seen. "Someone is following you," a voice whispered in her mind. She pushed the speed up to 75 km/h, but the faint glint, that low, persistent reflection, still appeared with that same unsettling rhythm. Another 5 miles passed. The road straightened for a long stretch, giving her an uninterrupted view. Ahead, maybe half a mile away, Alara saw a vehicle. It was a dark sedan, pulled completely off onto the shoulder, but facing the wrong direction, back toward the way she had come. Its hazard lights pulsed, bathing the area in an orange synthetic urgency. This was the classic distress signal, the kind people are conditioned to stop for. She slowed down, not out of willingness, but necessity. The fear of what was behind her was now replaced by the fear of what was ahead. Alara stopped her car a safe 100 yards before the sedan, pulling over to the shoulder. She kept her engine running, lights fully on, and the doors locked. Using her phone, she zoomed in as much as possible, the screen providing a grainy, pixelated view. The sedan was a mess. One rear tire was blown, and the trunk was ajar, revealing nothing but black void. No people, no movement. She honked twice, a quick, loud burst, then waited. Silence. The woods absorbed the sound instantly. This was the trap. They had been waiting for her to stop. The realization hit her. The hazard lights were too regular, too bright for a battery that had been sitting there for hours. They were freshly switched on. She reached for her glove compartment, pulling out the small, heavy flashlight she kept there. She rolled her window down only an inch, just enough to shout, "Are you okay? Do you need me to call for help?" Her voice cracked. Still nothing. She saw a flicker of movement just beyond the disabled sedan, a shift in the deepest shadows of the roadside brush. It was too low to be a standing person. She didn't need any more confirmation. The staged car, the empty scene, the purposeful bike earlier. It was all designed to get her to stop and engage. She quickly checked her side mirror. The low glinting light was gone. They were no longer behind her. They were here. A sound, the distinct, heavy crunch of a boot on dry leaves, came from the woods beside her. It wasn't loud, but in the silence of the night, it was a thunderclap. She slammed the window shut and threw the transmission into drive. Alara floored the gas pedal. The SUV spun slightly on the loose gravel shoulder before catching the asphalt, launching her forward past the disabled sedan. As she flew by, she saw them, 2 figures, dressed in dark clothing, rising from the ditch near the sedan. One of them hurled something, a small, dark rock, which harmlessly hit her passenger side window. As she gained speed, she checked her rearview mirror again. The sedan's lights were still blinking, but now, a low-slung, dark car without its headlights on pulled out from the trees further down the service road behind the sedan and began to accelerate after her. She reached for her phone. Voice command snapping. Call 911. The connection failed. Emergency service unavailable in this area. Of course. She had been in a cell-dead zone for the last half hour, but now she was too panicked to think rationally. She tried texting her husband. In trouble. Highway X, MM55 car following me. They staged a trap. The message hung in the queue, displaying a gray, mocking, sending icon. The silent car behind her was closing the gap. She was completely alone. Just as the pursuit vehicle was close enough that she could feel the bass thrum of its engine, she saw another sign, the most sophisticated ruse yet. A hastily erected, official-looking construction detour sign blocked the main highway, directing traffic onto a narrow, unpaved service road marked Detour Bridge Inspection. She knew that road. It was a notoriously tight, forgotten logging trail, a dead end leading to a defunct dam. If she took it, she would be completely trapped. If she stopped, they would catch her. Alara didn't stop. She considered smashing through the sign, but the detour sign was weighted with concrete blocks. She was out of options. She reluctantly slowed and turned onto the gravel service road. The dust kicked up immediately, forming a thick, blinding cloud behind her, a temporary shield. The road was barely wide enough for 2 cars. She could no longer see the pursuit vehicle, but she knew it was there, following her into the choking cloud of dust. She was now driving blind, the thick woods scraping the sides of her SUV. The service road opened into a small, dark clearing. In the center sat the skeletal remnants of the old dam structure. The gravel road ended abruptly here, trapped. Alara slammed on the brakes. Her headlights caught a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, directly in front of her. The figure was tall, silhouetted against the dark rock of the dam, wearing what looked like a reflective safety vest, a deliberate nod to the bridge inspection sign. They weren't running. They were waiting. The pursuit vehicle, finally emerging from the dust, pulled up 50 feet behind her, boxing her in. Its headlights flared on, blinding her in the rearview mirror. The figure in the safety vest began to walk slowly toward her window. She saw his face now, gaunt, with an unsettlingly polite smile. "Lost, ma'am?" he asked, his voice calm, conversational. "We knew you'd take the detour. They all do. The bike, the car, just ways to get you to call attention to yourself so we know who to follow in the dark." He reached for her door handle. Alara didn't hesitate. She threw the car into reverse, ignoring the squealing protest of the tires as she slammed the accelerator. The 2 men in the pursuit vehicle had barely gotten out. She aimed her rear fender not at the car itself, but at the driver's side door of the pursuit vehicle. Crunch! The impact was loud, bending their door inward and forcing the 2 men to scatter. The figure in the safety vest flinched, giving Alara the fraction of a second she needed. She slammed the gear stick forward into drive, swerved sharply onto the grassy embankment, and drove around the figure and off the trail. Alara didn't slow down until she hit the main interstate 50 miles later. She found a 24-hour gas station, pulled in, and called the state patrol. They found the decoy sedan, the detour sign, and the damaged pursuit vehicle, all abandoned. The only evidence of the people was a single set of boot prints leading away into the woods. She was safe, but the isolation was gone forever. Every late-night drive, every misplaced object, every car pulled over on the shoulder. They were no longer anomalies. They were now potential traps. The roads she once drove were now battlegrounds, and every act of caution was a necessity. The ruse had failed, but the lesson, that crippling fear of the open road, was permanently imprinted. Elias checked the rearview mirror instinctively, not for traffic, but for confirmation of his solitude. He was climbing the spine of the Siskiyou, mountains on a decommissioned stretch of Highway 99, a route only truckers and fools used after midnight. It was 12:48 a.m., his old 06 set and strained against the incline, its engine whine swallowed by the sheer mass of the surrounding forest. The air was thin, cold, and utterly silent save for the car's mechanics. He hadn't seen another set of taillights in 40 minutes. The last bar of cell service had vanished 20 minutes ago, replaced by the universal no service icon. The radio was worse. After struggling with a distant country station, it collapsed into a deep, rhythmic static that Elias quickly muted. The silence was profound, not peaceful but heavy, like a suffocating blanket. It removed the last illusion of connection to the civilized world. He was alone, suspended in a pocket of deep, unrecorded darkness, dependent only on the narrow beam of his headlights. He topped the summit and began the long, winding descent. It was 3 minutes into the downhill run when he saw it. Not in the center of the mirror, but in the extreme lower corner of his driver's side rearview mirror, a tiny, momentary glint. It was low to the ground, reflecting the curve of the highway in a way that suggested metal, scraping or catching the light from an odd angle. He glanced again. Gone. Just a piece of roadside debris, he rationalized. He sped up, needing to reach the valley floor. Elias decided he needed a 2-minute break. He pulled into an abandoned, asphalt-cracked scenic overlook. He left the engine idling, the sound of the running car a comforting noise in the void. He sipped lukewarm water and stared out at the view, or what would have been a view in daylight. Now it was just a massive, impenetrable curtain of blackness, the abyss of the valley. He felt exposed, parked at the edge of the world. He was about to pull out when the glint returned. This time he was stopped, engine running, so there was no movement to justify a reflection. He stared into the rearview mirror. Nothing. But then, as he watched, a faint light, a tiny focused beam, not a headlight, flickered briefly at the edge of the winding road, maybe a mile back. Then, he saw the faint, improper movement, a dark shape performing a slow, deliberate U-turn on the narrow road far below. It wasn't driving up the mountain. It was turning around to drive down the road he had just finished descending. It had been waiting. Elias accelerated back onto the highway, heart slamming against his ribs. He drove fast, maybe 85 kilometers per hour on the curving road, hoping to outrun the uncertainty. He watched the rear-view mirror like a hawk. Within 5 minutes, the light appeared again. Not the low glint, but the full terrifying shape of a car. But it had no headlights on. It was a dark, low-slung sedan, and it was impossibly close. It was riding his bumper, consuming the entire space directly behind his trunk. He could only see its outline when his own taillights cast a faint, ruby glow on its dark hood. They can't be that close if they can't see the road, he thought wildly. They must be using night vision or know this road intimately. He made a reckless decision. He lightly tapped his brakes, just a quick warning flash. The sedan did not flinch, did not slow, and did not back off. It maintained the exact same distance, an inhumanly precise gap that spoke not of careless tailgating, but of calculated machine-like pursuit. Elias's breath hitched. This wasn't a driver. This was something engineered to track. He decided to change lanes, hoping to force a reaction. He signaled right, for a change in his country. Merging into the fast lane on the 4-lane highway, the dark car smoothly, silently, and immediately merged with him, maintaining the same relentless proximity behind his right rear fender. He signaled left and moved back to the slow lane. The stalker moved back, still directly in his most dangerous blind spot. This wasn't a chase. This was a controlled placement. They wanted to stay unseen, yet constantly felt. Elias, in a frenzy of desperation, swerved slightly, forcing his car to shimmy just enough to shift the reflection in his side mirror. For a fleeting second, no more than a blink, he caught a glimpse of the driver's side window of the following car. What he saw terrified him more than the chase. The driver was not leaning forward, not checking mirrors, not gripping the wheel. They were sitting perfectly upright, hands low, head tilted back against the rest, completely motionless. There was no expression, no indication of life or reaction in the single, unmoving silhouette. He had to get off the highway. The town of Reading was still 40 miles away, but there was an old highway maintenance detour coming up, a tight, unmarked dirt track. He took the exit hard, throwing the car sideways onto the unpaved road. The stalker followed, their silent car now generating a spray of dust. But then a new sound began, a terrible metallic screeching and dragging coming from the rear of his own vehicle. It sounded like something heavy and jagged was scraping the asphalt, right beneath his trunk. The dragging noise grew louder, more insistent and rhythmic. It didn't sound like a loose muffler or a branch. It sounded intentional. Elias looked at the fuel gauge. A quarter tank left. Maybe 10 more miles of hard driving before he was running on fumes. The stalker behind him suddenly slowed, dropping back into the swirling dust cloud. But the dragging noise on Elias's bumper continued, confirming that whatever was attached was on his car. They hadn't just followed him. They had rigged his vehicle while he was stopped at the scenic overlook. He drove past a roadside marker he didn't recognize, a massive, rusted iron cross dedicated to a forgotten pioneer family. He sped by it, but the chilling sight of the corroded metal, the silence of the woods, and the relentless dragging noise fused into a single moment of absolute dread. He was not just being pursued, he was being herded into a final destination, his vehicle deliberately handicapped. The realization was a paralyzing, cold shock. The engine began to sputter. The fuel light intensified from a warning glow to a desperate, solid red. He was out of gas. He coasted into the last possible space, a small, circular turnaround point beside a derelict cinder-block pump house. The car died with a final pathetic click. The scratching sound stopped abruptly. Elias was trapped. He threw the gear into park and locked every door and window, fumbling with his phone to try and dial 911 one last time. Still no service. 50 yards back, where the turnaround met the access road, the dark sedan appeared, headlights still off. It stopped, perfectly positioned to block his exit, becoming a black monument to his failure. The driver's side door of the stalker's car opened slowly, hinges squeaking in the terrible silence. Elias didn't look through the side window. He used the small, reflective surface of his phone screen to track the movement behind him. A figure detached itself from the shadow of the sedan, tall, dressed in heavy dark clothing that absorbed all light. It did not approach Elias's car. Instead, it walked with unnerving slowness straight to Elias's rear bumper. Elias finally forced himself to look. Hanging from his tow hitch, secured with heavy-gauge wire, was a foot-long, serrated metal hook on the end of a thick, heavy chain. It was designed to drag and score the road, making noise that was physically and psychologically debilitating. The figure bent down, detached the apparatus, and tossed it carelessly into the ditch. Then, instead of approaching the car, the figure stood up and walked to a distance of 20 feet from Elias's driver's side door. They did not raise a hand, did not knock, and did not speak. They simply stood there, perfectly still, watching. The only indication of their presence was the faint condensation of their breath in the cold air. It was a silent, patient confrontation, a vigil. In a desperate, reckless move, Elias took his phone, turned the brightness to the absolute maximum, and aimed the screen directly at his own face, holding it up to the glass like a beacon. The light was harsh, exposing his terrified face, but it also cast a brilliant, sudden glare on the figure outside. The figure flinched, raising a hand to shield their eyes from the unexpected light source. It was the first human reaction he had seen. Elias realized his mistake. He had given them a clear target. He dropped the phone and frantically searched the floor, pulling out the only weapon he had, a heavy, rusty tire iron. He didn't plan to fight. He planned to make enough noise to draw attention, or at least scare them away. He began pounding the tire iron against the inside of the dashboard, creating a deafening, echoing clang. The figure finally broke their vigil, taking 2 steps back, seemingly confused or annoyed by the sudden, uncontrolled noise. This was his chance. Elias threw the car into neutral, released the parking brake, and using his body weight, began to rock the car manually. The dead car, on the slight downhill slope of the turnaround, began to move. It rolled silently, gaining a slow momentum. He steered frantically, managing to angle the car toward the narrow path beside the pump house, avoiding the blockading sedan. The car coasted onto the main highway. Elias put it in park and frantically started trying to crank the engine, praying for fumes. On the 3rd try, the engine caught. A weak, sputtering gasp. He threw it into drive and sped away, watching the rearview mirror, until the silhouette of the pump house and the dark sedan vanished. The pursuit didn't restart. They had trapped him, stalked him, and mentally broken him, but they hadn't finished the job. Elias drove the remaining miles on the sheer, desperate fumes of his fear, finally reaching a brightly lit gas station in Reading. He called the police. The maintenance road was searched, but nothing was found. No metal hook, no dark car, and no tracks except his own. He was the only witness. But every shadow on the road, every flicker in his mirror, every moment of silence would forever remind him of the silent, predatory presence waiting in the rear view. Maya had been driving the Nevada high plains for 6 hours straight. The sun was gone, leaving behind a sky so vast and black it felt like staring into deep space. The road, Highway 50, often called the loneliest road in America, lived up to its name. Her little hatchback, packed tight with everything she owned, was the only movement in a sea of scrub brush and distant, jagged mountains. She was on mile 400 of nothing. The last functioning radio signal had died nearly an hour ago. She twisted the dial, but the speakers yielded nothing but a hissing, white noise waterfall. It was a sound that seemed to consume all other noise, leaving her trapped in a metallic shell with her own labored breathing. She turned the radio off. The resulting silence was heavier than the static, pressing in from the empty miles around her. It appeared first as a misplaced star, a single bright speck far, far behind her. She watched it for 5 minutes, confirming it wasn't celestial. It was a vehicle, and its high beams were on, cutting through the haze of the long road. She felt a brief, irrational relief. She was no longer completely alone. She maintained her speed, 70 kilometers per hour, the legal limit. 10 minutes later, the speck was noticeably closer. It was closing the distance too fast. She was maintaining a steady speed, but the approaching car was devouring the miles between them at an alarming rate, suggesting it was traveling at close to 100 kilometers per hour. Still, she could only make out the intensity of the light, not the vehicle itself. It was just a monstrous, growing glare. Maya checked her speedometer again, 70 kilometers per hour. She tapped the brakes gently to verify her taillights were functioning. They flared red, momentarily illuminating the roadside. The light behind her didn't react. She accelerated suddenly to 85 kilometers per hour for 30 seconds, then returned to 70 kilometers per hour. The approaching light continued its steady, rapid gain, completely unaffected by her maneuvers. It felt like the distance was a conveyor belt moving only it forward. Now it was close enough to fully resolve into a shape. A huge, boxy black pickup truck, sitting unnervingly high off the road. What was terrifying was that its high beams had not once dipped. They were locked on, blinding her, burning 2 spots into her retinas. The driver was making no effort to pass or show courtesy. It was pure aggressive intimidation. Instead of passing, the truck pulled slightly into the oncoming lane and began to match her speed exactly, running parallel to her rear quarter panel. This put the truck's front end right in her side mirror. She could see the enormous black grille and the chrome bumper, and nothing else. The driver was intentionally keeping their cab out of her direct view, occupying the space where she would naturally look for an escape. Driven by panic, Maya risked a quick, direct glance to her right through the passenger window. The truck cab was dark, its windows tinted. She could barely make out the silhouette of the driver. But as she watched, the truck drifted slightly closer, and the driver's window reflected the faint dashboard light from her car. She saw it clearly for a split second. A face, obscured by a wide, featureless dark baseball cap, and a pair of white round objects that might have been eyes, staring not at the road, but directly at her. The face was absolutely still, without expression. Maya slammed on her brakes hard. The car shuddered. She expected the truck to pass or collide, but the truck also braked, its massive frame remaining in perfect position next to her. She sped up. The truck sped up. She slowed to 30 kilometers per hour. The truck slowed to 30 kilometers per hour. It was playing a sinister game of choreography, demonstrating complete control. They didn't want to pass her. They wanted to control her pace and her fear. After minutes of this forced, slow-motion tandem driving, Maya saw it up ahead, a large, dark object lying in the middle of the road. It looked like a deer or a massive piece of debris. This was the trap, the reason for the forced deceleration. She knew if she stopped, they would simply pull in front of her. She had to accelerate and force a pass. Maya dropped her head, screamed, and floored the accelerator, cutting sharply into the truck's lane. Her car scraped against the curb on the left, but she was ahead. She shot past the stationary object on the road. It wasn't a deer, but a large canvas duffel bag, placed to force a stop. She kept driving, pushing the car to its absolute limit, waiting for the massive truck to return in her rearview mirror. She drove for 5 minutes at over 100 kilometers per hour, not daring to look away from the road ahead. Finally, she glanced in the mirror. Empty. She risked another look. Still empty. The truck was gone. A massive lifted pickup, easily capable of matching her speed, had simply vanished into the desert night. There was no side road, no light, no evidence it had ever been there. The silence returned, now laced with an unbearable confusion. After 30 more minutes of heart-pounding paranoia, she spotted the first sign of civilization, an illuminated, slightly dingy sign for an all-night truck stop and diner. She pulled into the vast, half-empty lot, the fluorescent lights of the building feeling like a warm, protective embrace. She parked right beneath a lamppost, as close to the diner entrance as possible. She opened her door, ready to run inside, when a shape in the far corner of the lot caught her attention. Parked in the deepest, most isolated shadow, away from the other few big rigs, was a massive black pickup truck. It was the exact same model, the same height, and the same menacing profile. Its engine was off, its cab was completely dark, and its high beams were extinguished. It was waiting. How? She had driven flat out for 30 minutes. There were no other roads for miles. The truck must have pulled off, circled back, and somehow beaten her to the only point of rest on the entire highway. This was not a random driver. This was someone who knew her destination, or was tracking her using information she couldn't comprehend. She slammed her door shut and locked it, scrambling for her only weapon, a cheap pepper spray can. She didn't move. She didn't dare go into the brightly lit diner, knowing that would leave her car exposed and her trapped inside. She sat there for 10 minutes, watching the dark cab of the truck. No door opened. No light flickered. It was as still and lifeless as a tombstone. Finally, a movement. The faintest sound of a creak came from the truck cab. Then, something appeared in the driver's side window, a large, worn boot, resting casually on the dashboard of the truck. The presence was there, mocking her, relaxed, completely in control of the situation. It was a silent message. I know you're here, and I'm not in a hurry. She couldn't stay. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't wait for dawn. She had to run. She checked her mirrors, threw the car into reverse, and sped out of the lot, turning back onto the highway she had just escaped. As she reached the main road, she risked one last look back at the truck stop. The pickup truck remained motionless in the shadows, its dark presence a permanent fixture in the night. It took another terrifying 2 hours of driving with her, eyes glued to the empty rearview mirror, until the eastern sky began to bleed an orange-gray light. With the dawn, the phone's no service icon finally flickered and died, replaced by 3 bars of 3G. She pulled over immediately and called her mother, her voice a ragged, broken mess as she recounted the impossible pursuit. The police found no evidence of a black truck matching her description at the truck stop, but later that morning, after she had driven into a town and was unloading her car, she found something she hadn't seen before. Tucked neatly under her windshield wiper, secured by the weight of the wiper arm, was a small, perfectly folded piece of cardboard. On it, written in thick, permanent marker, was a single, chilling word, again. The isolation stretch had ended, but the vigil had not. Dean hated Saturday night deliveries, but the pay for transporting specialized aerospace components to the remote testing facility was too good to pass up. He was driving a heavy-duty pickup, not a full semi, but the enclosed trailer behind him made maneuvering tight corners difficult. It was 1:55 a.m., and he had just turned onto County Route 44, a 6-mile stretch of crumbling asphalt that sliced through old, neglected orchards and dense redwood scrub. He had driven maybe 3 miles down the route when his headlights revealed the blockage. It wasn't an abandoned car or a simple hazard. 2 vehicles were positioned diagonally across the road, effectively forming a complete, deliberate barrier. The lead vehicle was a rusted-out box van, and the second, closer vehicle was an old blue sedan. Neither had their lights on, but their silhouettes were unmistakable. Dean slowed the truck to a stop 50 yards back. Before he could even shift into park, 2 figures emerged from the dense shadows on the left side of the road. Near the box van, they were large, bulky men wearing dark clothing and ski masks. They weren't moving quickly, but their movement was purposeful and directed straight at him. The ambush had begun too soon. Dean didn't hesitate. He slammed the gear selector into reverse and floored it. The heavy truck and trailer lurched backward, throwing up a rooster tail of gravel and dust. He needed distance to turn around, but the trailer made a tight maneuver impossible. He focused on keeping the truck centered on the narrow road, listening for the sickening sound of metal tearing as he scraped the brush. The backward dash lasted less than 10 seconds before he felt the sickening crunch of a second vehicle hitting the back of his trailer. A dark, low-rider vehicle had been lying in wait behind him, acting as a backstop. He was completely boxed in. A box van ahead, a sedan blocking the front, and a third car pressed against his rear hitch. The engine stalled from the shock of the rear collision. Total silence descended. punctuated only by the ringing in Dean's ears. He acted on instinct, hammering the central door lock button on his console, securing the doors. He frantically tried the ignition, but the engine only gave a grinding cough. The two masked figures from the front were now running toward the cab. The first figure reached the driver's door and immediately began hammering on the window, not with a fist, but with a heavy, blunt object. Dean realized it was the head of a small sledgehammer. The reinforced glass held for a moment, but the heavy, rhythmic blows were deafening and certain. The glass spider-webbed, but the interior lamination prevented immediate failure. The second figure, meanwhile, was at the passenger door. Instead of smashing the window, he was using a long pry bar, silently and methodically, working the gap between the door frame and the body of the truck. This figure was focused on leverage, not noise. Dean knew that once the seal gave, the locks wouldn't matter. Dean ignored the sledgehammer blows and scrambled to his glove compartment, pulling out the only defensive tool he had, a heavy-duty ratchet wrench he used for trailer maintenance. It was clumsy, but it was solid steel. He tucked it into the sleeve of his jacket, ready to use the moment the door seal failed. With a sickening, high-pitched screech of tearing metal, the pry bar figure found purchase. The passenger door frame visibly bowed inward. The pressurized air in the cab escaped with a loud whoosh. The figure dropped the bar and simultaneously reached an arm inside, fumbling for the lock. Dean braced himself, the heavy wrench a cold weight in his hand. Just as the hand was about to connect with the lock, a sudden bright flash of light and a loud, piercing air horn blast ripped through the night from further up the road, beyond the box van. It was the distinct, deep blast of a full-size 18-wheeler. Both figures froze, turning their masked faces toward the new, unexpected threat. The arrival of a legitimate, heavy truck was a massive complication for the attackers. An 18-wheeler driver could easily see the roadblock and call the state patrol. Or worse, use their vehicle as an actual battering ram. The figure with the pry bar quickly pulled his arm out of the cab, and both men sprinted back toward the box van. Dean didn't wait to see if the large truck would stop. He slammed the gear into the lowest forward gear first and repeatedly cranked the engine. On the fifth try, it caught, a roaring, angry sound of combustion. He turned the wheel sharply to the right and accelerated, intending to drive directly off-road through the soft dirt shoulder and into the orchard. The truck hit the shoulder and dipped violently. The heavy load in the trailer slid, but the powerful four-wheel drive caught and pulled him through the soft earth of the orchard. He heard a metallic grinding as his trailer hitch caught on a low-hanging tree branch, but he didn't stop. He was driving blind through the trees, aiming for the parallel service road he knew was 50 yards away. He burst through the last line of trees and slammed onto the parallel service road. As he sped away, he glanced back at the main road. The large 18-wheeler was now stopped, its high beams bathing the abandoned roadblock. He saw the attackers, now 4 of them. Confirming there were 2 inside the backstop car piling into the old blue, said and then speeding away in the opposite direction. The ambush was scattered. Dean drove for 5 miles before pulling into a brightly lit abandoned rest area. He killed the engine and got out, trembling violently. He examined the damage. The passenger door frame was hopelessly bowed, the lock mechanism visible but useless, and the rear of the trailer had a huge, jagged dent from the collision. But the cargo seals were intact, and the truck was drivable. He had escaped. He called the state patrol, giving them the coordinates and details of the attack. Before hanging up, he asked about the 18-wheeler. The dispatcher, after running his report, informed him that no other vehicle had called in about the incident, and no commercial truck matching that description was logged on that section of the highway that night. His savior had been entirely anonymous, or perhaps another part of the ambush that failed. The components were delivered successfully, and the police found the abandoned roadblock vehicles, which were quickly traced back to a network of chop shops. But the men were never caught. Dean recovered from the physical trauma, but the emotional scars remained. Every time he locked his doors, he felt the vibration of the sledgehammer. Every time he parked, he checked under his trailer for a backstop. The memory of the silent, methodical prying of the door and the impossible, timely arrival of the ghost truck made every isolated road a potential kill zone. The Blacktop ambush had failed to take his cargo, but it had successfully stolen his peace of mind.